Jessica Lane took a deep breath as she approached the lecture hall at Harper University, her mind racing with thoughts about her presentation. The air was thick with anticipation, and she could feel the weight of her classmates' eyes on her as she entered. The room was filled with students, their desks cluttered with notebooks and laptops, all eager to soak in the wisdom of Professor Daniel Wright. He was a revered figure on campus, known not only for his expansive knowledge, but also for his unmistakable passion for teaching. "Good morning, class." Professor Wright's voice boomed as he entered the room, a warm smile illuminating his face. "Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from one of our brightest stars, Jessica Lane." He gestured toward her, and the class erupted in applause, which made Jessica's heart race even faster. As she approached the front, she could feel the butterflies in her stomach fluttering more violently. Jessica had poured her heart into her project, a detailed analysis of the ethical implications of modern scientific practices, and she desperately wanted to impress him. "Thank you, Professor Wright," she said, her voice slightly wavering. "I'm excited to share my research with you all." As she presented, she caught glimpses of Professor Wright nodding appreciatively. His attention was unwavering, and that made her feel more at ease. "This is a vital topic, Jessica," he said, his voice steady yet enthusiastic. "You've done an excellent job of articulating the complexities involved. Keep pushing those boundaries." His words were like a soothing balm to her nerves. After the lecture, the classroom buzzed with chatter as students gathered their belongings. Jessica felt a surge of pride and relief wash over her. She had done it. She had impressed the professor. But just as she was about to leave, Professor Wright called her name. "Jessica, could you come to my office for a moment? I'd like to discuss your project further." "Of course, Professor," she replied, her heart racing for a different reason now. She had always admired him not just as an educator, but as a mentor who believed in her potential. Entering his office, she was met with the familiar scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee. "Please have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Jessica sat down, her excitement palpable. "I read your project thoroughly," he started, leaning forward with a serious expression. "You have a unique perspective, and I believe you're destined for great things in academia. Just remember, the path isn't always easy, but it's worth it." "Thank you so much, Professor Wright," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Your support means the world to me." He smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Just keep that fire alive, Jessica. I'm here to help you in any way I can." The following day, Jessica awoke with a sense of optimism, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. As she made her way to class, she replayed their conversation in her mind, feeling bolstered by his encouragement. However, that optimism was short-lived. When she arrived on campus, she was met with an eerie atmosphere. Whispers floated through the hallways, and students exchanged worried glances. Confused, she made her way to the department building, only to find a small crowd gathered outside Professor Wright's office. Her heart sank as she approached, sensing something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" she asked a fellow student, her voice barely above a whisper. "Professor Wright, he's been found dead," the student replied, shock etched on their face. Jessica felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "What? No, that can't be true." Panic surged through her. She pushed through the crowd, her heart racing. Inside the office, the scene was chaotic. Police were everywhere, and the somber expression on an officer's face sent chills down her spine. As she stood there, the realization hit her like a sledgehammer. She was one of the last people to see him alive. "Jessica Lane?" an officer called, and her stomach dropped. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to ask you a few questions regarding Professor Wright's death," he said, his tone serious. Jessica blinked, unable to process the words. I didn't do anything. I was just talking to him yesterday." "Please, we just need to understand the circumstances," he insisted. Feeling the walls closing in around her, she fought back tears. Jessica never imagined that a routine meeting could lead to such a nightmare. As the officer continued to question her, the weight of suspicion settled heavily upon her shoulders, and she could only wonder how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Jessica Lane stood in the dimly lit hallway of Harper University, her heart racing. The news of Professor Daniel Wright's death had spread like wildfire, and now she found herself at the center of a storm. With her mind racing, she pushed open the door to the police station set up on campus, spotting Detective David O'Connor across the room. He was a former student of the university, and his reputation for solving complex cases preceded him. Detective O'Connor? Jessica approached him, her voice trembling slightly. "I need your help. I didn't kill Professor Wright." David looked up from his notes, his expression a mix of seriousness and curiosity. "I understand that this is a difficult time for you, Jessica, but I need to ask you a few questions first. Can you tell me where you were last night?" "I was studying in my dorm," she replied, desperation creeping into her voice. "I have friends who can vouch for me. Please, you have to believe me." I looked up to Professor Wright. He nodded, his gaze softening slightly. "I believe you, but you need to help me understand more about your relationship with him. What did he mean to you?" "He was a mentor," Jessica said, memories flooding back. "He pushed me to be my best. He believed in me when no one else did. I can't fathom why anyone would want to hurt him." David took a deep breath, knowing that they had to dig deeper. "Let's go to his office. We need to examine the crime scene together." As they entered Wright's office, an overwhelming sense of loss enveloped Jessica. The room was a chaotic mix of books, papers, and the lingering scent of old coffee. David began examining the desk methodically, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. "It looks like he was working on something important," he muttered, running his fingers over a stack of papers. Jessica noticed a glint of something unusual on the desk. "What's that?" she asked, pointing. David leaned closer, revealing a small glass vial half hidden beneath a pile of manuscripts. "It's a poison vial," he said, frowning. "This could change everything." He carefully picked it up, turning it over in his hand. "Do you recognize this?" "No," Jessica replied, shaking her head. "I've never seen it before." Professor Wright didn't seem like the type to have something like that in his office. David's expression grew serious. "There's a chance this was used to kill him. We need to find out who had access to this office and who could have wanted him dead." He looked at her, his eyes probing. "Did he ever mention any conflicts with students or colleagues?" Jessica thought hard, her mind racing through her interactions with Wright. "He was always professional, but I know some students struggled with his courses. There were rumors about some people getting cut from his research projects." She paused, feeling the weight of the implications. "But it's hard to believe anyone would go this far. Sometimes, it's the people closest to us who harbor the darkest intentions," David replied, moving away from the desk to survey the room further. He scanned the walls, noticing the framed awards and degrees that hung proudly. "There must be more to this story. Let's look for anything that could provide insight into his relationships." As they continued their investigation, Jessica's heart sank. What if someone had been jealous of her success? What if someone had felt betrayed? She couldn't shake the feeling that they were uncovering layers of secrets that had been buried beneath the surface for years. "If he had enemies, it could be anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Exactly," David replied, pulling out his notepad. "We need to speak to other students and faculty. If he was about to expose something big, or if he had a personal vendetta against him, that could provide us with the motive we're looking for. But first, we need to understand more about this vial." He placed it carefully back on the desk. "We'll have it analyzed for fingerprints and any traces of the poison." Jessica nodded, determination replacing her fear. "I won't let them pin this on me. We have to find out who really did this." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the investigation ahead. "I want to help in any way I can." David smiled slightly, appreciating her resolve. "Good. Let's work together to uncover the truth, starting with those who are close to him. There's a lot at stake here, and we need to be careful. The more we dig, the more we might uncover." With a shared sense of purpose, they left the office, ready to dive into the murky waters of academia, where ambition and rivalry often collided in dangerous ways. Jessica Lane felt a rush of anxiety as she flipped through the pages of the leather-bound journal she had uncovered among Professor Wright's belongings. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp, casting elongated shadows on the walls. Each entry she read seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding Wright's untimely death, revealing a world of fear, resentment, and hidden truths. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she turned the page to reveal several names scrawled in neat handwriting. He documented students he had conflicts with. "Mark is right here." David O'Connor leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he scanned the entries. "Mark? The one who was always complaining about his grades? What does it say?" "It says he felt sabotaged by Wright during the final project. He believed the professor was intentionally making it harder for him to succeed," Jessica explained, her heart racing. Wright even noted that Mark was volatile and should be watched closely. "Sounds like a red flag," David replied, his voice steady but serious. "Do you think he could have acted on those feelings? Revenge can push people to do terrible things." Jessica's mind raced with thoughts of Mark's strained demeanor during their classes and the way he had glared at Wright whenever he received a critique. "It's possible," she replied, biting her lip. "But why would he risk everything? There are other students here who had issues with Wright too." David nodded, his gaze fixed on the journal. "True, but we need to dig deeper. Let's find out more about Mark and whether he had the opportunity to harm Wright." With a newfound determination, they decided to confront Mark. Jessica felt a pang of trepidation as they made their way to the campus cafe, where Mark often hung out with his friends after classes. The bustling atmosphere did little to ease her nerves as they approached him, who was seated alone, absorbed in his phone. "Mark," Jessica said, her voice firm but friendly. "Can we talk for a minute?" Mark looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "What do you want?" he snapped, putting his phone down with a thud. David stepped forward, his presence commanding yet calm. "We need to ask you some questions about Professor Wright. Is that all right?" "What about him?" Mark retorted, crossing his arms defensively. "Your name came up in an investigation," Jessica replied, trying to maintain her composure. "We've heard you had some issues with him.
Can you tell us more about that?"
Mark's eyes narrowed, and Jessica noticed the tension in his posture. "I didn't like the guy, okay? But I didn't kill him," he shot back, his voice rising a notch. "Then why did you feel sabotaged? Did he really make it harder for you?" David pressed, his tone even, trying to coax the truth out of Mark. "Maybe he did, but that doesn't mean I wanted him dead." Mark snapped, his temper flaring. "I just wanted to do well in my classes. That man was just impossible." "Impossible enough to push you over the edge?" Jessica asked, her heart racing. "You were angry, weren't you? You must have felt trapped." Mark's face reddened, but he shook his head vigorously. "I didn't kill him. I had issues, but I'm not a murderer." As the tension escalated, Jessica exchanged a glance with David. They could feel the weight of Mark's anger, but they needed more than just denial. "We found a journal that suggests you were on Wright's radar for being volatile. What else do you want to say?" David stated, maintaining a steady gaze on Mark. "Look, I was frustrated, but who isn't in this cutthroat environment? Everyone was fighting for their grades. I just wanted to get through my final project," Mark replied, his voice lowering as he shifted in his seat. "You think I could have done something like that? You have no idea what I was going through." His defensiveness shifted to a hint of vulnerability, and Jessica felt a pang of empathy. "We understand the pressure, Mark, but you have to help us figure out what happened. Did anyone else have a problem with him?" Mark hesitated, glancing around as if weighing his options. "There were others, sure," he finally admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I'm not the only one who felt wronged. A lot of us had issues with Wright. He ran his class like a dictator." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. The walls of the cafe suddenly felt too close, the voices of other students drowned out by the pounding of her heart. "Who else, Mark? We need names," she urged, her voice tinged with urgency. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but just then, his phone buzzed on the table, breaking the intensity of the moment. He glanced at it, his expression shifting immediately to one of panic. "I can't do this right now," he said abruptly, standing up and grabbing his things. "I have to go." Jessica reached out, but he was already striding away, determination in his steps. "Mark," she called after him, but he didn't look back. What just happened? David asked, looking perplexed. I don't know, Jessica replied, feeling the weight of uncertainty press down on her. But I think we've just scratched the surface. As the investigation deepened, Jessica found herself drawn to a group of students who frequently gathered with Professor Wright. She felt a compulsion to understand their dynamics, sensing that their relationships with him might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. The sun cast long shadows across the campus as she approached the secluded area behind the library where she had overheard rumors of their meetings. Hey, can we talk? Jessica said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The group, a mix of familiar faces, paused their animated conversation. A tall, athletic girl named Megan stepped forward, her brow furrowed in concern. What do you want, Jess? This isn't a good time, Megan replied, her tone defensive. I know you guys were close to Professor Wright. I need to understand what was going on between you all, Jessica pressed, keeping her gaze steady. The other students exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of irritation and curiosity. Why are you so interested? He's dead, and it's not like you were his favorite, said Aaron, a quiet, brooding student known for his dismissive remarks. Jessica took a deep breath, steadying her resolve. I'm being accused of his murder. I need to clear my name, and I think you all know something. Please, just tell me what was happening between you and Professor Wright. The group fell silent, the tension palpable. Finally, a girl named Olivia spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. He was going to expose some things about us. What do you mean? Jessica asked, her curiosity piqued. We were all part of the study group, but it was more than just academics. He started to uncover things that, well, let's just say they weren't above board, Olivia explained, glancing nervously at her friends. Like what? Jessica pressed, leaning in closer. Megan shifted uncomfortably. Some of us were involved in a cheating scandal. He caught wind of it and threatened to report us.
We were scared, Jess.
He was our mentor, but he was also our nightmare. Jessica felt her stomach drop. So, you're saying someone might have wanted him dead to keep their secret safe? Not just someone, Aaron interjected, his voice rising. It was a whole group of us. We didn't want to end our careers before they even began. As the group's confessions began to unfold, Jessica's mind raced with possibilities. Who else was involved? Did anyone have a stronger motive than just fear? Mark, Olivia said, her eyes darting around. He was devastated when he found out he was being expelled from the program. Wright was adamant about it, and he made it public. Jessica recalled her earlier encounter with Mark, the hostility in his voice echoing in her memory. If he was that desperate, he could have been driven to do something drastic, she murmured, thoughtfully. Look, we're just scared, Megan said, her voice trembling. We didn't want anything to happen to him, but we didn't know how to stop him from finding out more. Jessica nodded, understanding the weight of their fear. I need to speak with Mark and find out what he knows. If he truly had a motive, then he's a key part of this. As she turned to leave, Megan called after her. Just be careful, okay? Everyone's on edge. You don't want to make things worse. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine as she walked away, the weight of their revelations pressing heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't shake the feeling that the group's fear was just the surface of a much deeper problem. If Wright had been on the verge of exposing a scandal, it wasn't just about one student's career. It was about an entire system that could be brought down. Later that evening, Jessica met with David at a quiet cafe, the atmosphere heavy with the scent of roasted coffee and whispered conversations. She relayed the details of the meeting, her voice urgent and filled with intensity. Wright was sitting on something big, something that could ruin lives, she said, her eyes wide. We need to dig deeper into this cheating scandal. It might be the motive we're looking for. David nodded thoughtfully. If we can tie this to Mark, it could change everything. But we need to be careful. These students are already on edge, and we don't want to spook them into silence. Jessica felt a sense of determination rising within her. She knew they were getting closer to the truth, but with each revelation, the danger escalated. The shadows around them seemed darker, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they forged ahead, Jessica hoped they could unravel the tangled web before it ensnared them both. Jessica sat at her desk, papers scattered everywhere, her mind racing with thoughts of the recent events that had turned her life upside down. The shadow of Professor Daniel Wright's death loomed large over her, and with each passing moment, the weight of suspicion pressed down on her like an anchor. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the walls of her once safe academic haven were closing in on her. Why would anyone want to hurt him? She muttered under her breath, running a hand through her hair in frustration. He was the one person who believed in me. The memory of their loss. Tea conversation played back in her mind, his encouraging words ringing true. "Jessica, you have a bright future ahead of you," he had said, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Keep pushing forward." "Stop it," she snapped at herself, shaking her head to dispel the haunting thoughts. She couldn't afford to wallow in despair. She had to focus, to keep fighting for her name and her future. Just then, David O'Connor, the detective assigned to the case, walked into her cramped apartment, a look of determination etched on his face. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Jessica looked up, her heart racing. "Is it about the investigation? Have you found anything new?" "Not yet, but I want to know how you're holding up," he replied, leaning against her desk. "This isn't just a murder case. It's personal for you now." Jessica sighed, feeling the pressure of the situation weigh heavily on her. "I don't know how I'm supposed to feel, David. One moment I'm being praised for my work, and the next, I'm a suspect in a murder investigation." "Let's focus on the facts," he said, his tone steady. "You mentioned earlier that you had a rivalry with another student, Sarah. What's your relationship like with her?" Jessica hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We've always been competitive. She's brilliant, but there's a thin line between competition and jealousy. I've caught her trying to undermine me before, but I never thought she would, I don't know, take it this far." David nodded, taking in her words. "And with Professor Wright's death, do you think Sarah could have had a motive?" "I don't know," Jessica admitted, frustration bubbling to the surface. "But she was close to him. Maybe she was afraid he would expose something she was involved in. Maybe it was more than just academic rivalry." As they continued to discuss potential leads, Jessica's mind drifted back to the time she had overheard a conversation between Sarah and another student. They had been whispering urgently in a corner of the library, their expressions serious. She couldn't recall the specifics, but the intensity of their exchange had struck her as odd. "Jessica, are you with me?" David's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up to see concern etched on his face. "Sorry, I was just thinking about something I heard," she said, shaking her head to clear her mind. "I think I should confront Sarah. If there's anything going on, she needs to know that I'm not afraid." "Be careful," David warned, studying her expression. "People are unpredictable when they feel cornered. I'll be there to support you, but you need to tread lightly." Nodding resolutely, Jessica felt a surge of determination. She couldn't allow fear to dictate her actions any longer. "Let's go find her." As they made their way to the campus, unease settled in Jessica's stomach. The university grounds that had once felt like home now seemed hostile, each building a potential echo chamber for the whispers that surrounded her. She spotted Sarah sitting on a bench, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. "Let's do this," Jessica said, steeling herself. David walked beside her, his presence a reassuring anchor. "Remember, stay calm. You're just asking questions." Jessica approached Sarah, who looked up with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "What do you want, Jessica?" she snapped, her tone defensive. "Can we talk?" Jessica asked, keeping her voice steady. "I need to ask you about Professor Wright."
"Why?"
"You think I know something?" Sarah replied, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. Jessica took a deep breath, grounding herself. "It's just there are things happening and I need to understand. You were close to him. Did he ever tell you anything that could help us?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jessica could see the flicker of something, fear or perhaps guilt. "I don't know what you're talking about. Just leave me alone, okay?" David stepped forward, his authoritative tone cutting through the tension. "We're trying to get to the bottom of this, Sarah. Your behavior since the professor's death has been suspicious. Suspicious? Sarah laughed bitterly. You think I had something to do with it? You're both delusional. Jessica pressed on, her resolve hardening. I just want to know if you ever felt threatened by him. If there was something he was going to expose, anything at all. The silence hung heavy in the air, and for a brief moment, Jessica thought she saw a flicker of hesitation in Sarah's eyes. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a steely glare. You should be careful, Jessica. You never know who might turn on you. With that, Sarah stood up abruptly and walked away, her posture rigid. Jessica watched her go, a mix of frustration and fear swirling inside her. What was that about? She asked, turning to David. Something isn't right, he replied, his brow furrowed in thought. We need to dig deeper into Sarah's connections. She's hiding something, and it's time we find out what it is. As they walked away from the bench, Jessica felt the weight of the world bearing down on her. She was amidst a web of deceit, and the more she pulled at the threads, the more tangled she became. Jessica sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. The dim light from her desk lamp cast shadows across her room, amplifying the sense of dread that had taken residence in her stomach. The messages had started a few days ago, short, cryptic texts that seemed to know her every fear. You should be careful, Jessica. Not everyone is who they seem. The chill ran down her spine as she recalled the words. She had initially dismissed them as a prank, but as the days wore on and the tension surrounding Professor Wright's death grew thicker, the messages felt more like a sinister warning. As she paced the small confines of her room, her thoughts drifted to David O'Connor, the detective who had stepped in to help her. They had formed an unlikely alliance, but he was the only person who seemed to believe her innocence amidst the swirling accusations. Just then, her phone buzzed again. She picked it up, her heart racing. Another anonymous message. You're getting closer to the truth, but it won't set you free. Frustrated, she tossed her phone onto the bed and grabbed her notebook, flipping through pages of her thoughts and clues she had gathered. The investigation had been a whirlwind, and now she was feeling the pressure mount. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that someone wanted to keep her from uncovering the truth. Hey, Jessica. A voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see David leaning against her doorframe, a look of concern etched on his face. You okay? Not really, she admitted, running a hand through her hair. These messages, they're freaking me out. I can't tell if it's some sort of sick joke or if someone really wants to intimidate me. David stepped into the room, his presence grounding her. Maybe we should take a break from the investigation for a bit. You need to clear your head. No, we can't do that, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. I have to find out who killed Professor Wright before they come after me next. David studied her for a moment before nodding. All right then, let's focus on what we have. You mentioned you had a rivalry with another student, Sarah, right? Maybe she knows something that could help us. Jessica's heart sank at the mention of Sarah. They had always competed for the top spot in their classes, and their rivalry had only intensified after Wright's death. I don't know if she's involved, but she was close to him. If anyone had a motive, it could be her. Let's talk to her, David suggested, his tone encouraging. We need to cover all our bases. With a plan forming, Jessica felt a surge of determination. They agreed to meet Sarah later that evening in a nearby cafe, a place buzzing with students and the aroma of coffee. As they approached the cafe, Jessica's stomach churned with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Inside, they spotted Sarah sitting at a corner table, her fingers nervously tapping against her coffee cup. Jessica felt a knot tighten in her throat as they approached. Sarah looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to a guarded look. Jessica, David, she greeted, forcing a smile. What brings you here? Mind if we join you? David asked, pulling out a chair. Jessica followed suit, her heart racing as she braced for the conversation. Sure, Sarah replied, her voice laced with hesitation. What's going on? Actually, we wanted to ask you a few questions about Professor Wright, Jessica said, trying to keep her voice steady. You were close to him, right? Did he mention anything unusual before he died? Sarah's eyes darted around the cafe, as if searching for an escape route. I mean, he was my professor. He was always busy with his research. What do you mean by unusual? Jessica pressed on, sensing the tension in the air. There have been rumors about some sort of scandal involving him and a few students.
Did you know anything about that?
I'm not a gossip, Sarah snapped, her defensiveness rising. I didn't know anything. If he had issues, it wasn't with me. David leaned in, his voice calm but firm. Jessica has been accused of murder, Sarah. We're trying to figure out what happened. If you know something, now's the time to speak up. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, and Jessica felt the temperature of the cafe drop as Sarah's expression flickered with uncertainty. I don't want to get involved in any of this. You have no idea how complicated things are, she muttered, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at Jessica. Complicated how? Jessica pressed, frustration bubbling beneath her surface. Look, just leave me out of this, Sarah replied, her voice trembling slightly. I have my own problems to deal with. Jessica exchanged a glance with David, feeling the walls closing in. They were getting nowhere, and the atmosphere was thick with suspicion. As Sarah began to fidget with her coffee cup, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface, a secret that Sarah was unwilling to share, leaving Jessica with a gnawing question: how many others were involved in the shadows of Professor Wright's death? Jessica Lane and David O'Connor stood in the shadows of the university's quad, their eyes fixed on Sarah, who was sitting on a bench, her body language tense as she conversed with Mark. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the stone pathways, and the air was thick with an unspoken tension. Jessica felt her heart race, each beat echoing the uncertainty that had been building since Professor Wright's death. Do you think they're working together? Jessica whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She tugged nervously at the sleeves of her jacket, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. David, a seasoned detective who had returned to the campus he once called home, nodded thoughtfully. It's possible. They both had issues with Wright. If they shared a motive, they might have conspired to silence him. Jessica strained to hear their conversation, but the distance was too great. Mark leaned closer, his expression intense, while Sarah seemed to be defensive, crossing her arms as if trying to shield herself from his words. We need to get closer, Jessica urged, her curiosity overpowering her caution. Hold on, David replied, his instincts kicking in. Let's not blow our cover. We'll wait for the right moment to approach them. Minutes passed, feeling like hours, as the two watched the exchange unfold. Jessica's mind raced with possibilities. Could Sarah and Mark have been behind the professor's murder? She remembered the diary she had found, the entries that spoke of fear and resentment towards Wright. The thought of confronting them filled her with dread, but it was a necessary step to uncover the truth. Just then, Sarah stood up abruptly, her voice rising in agitation. You don't understand, Mark. I didn't have anything to do with it. I was just trying to protect my future. Mark's face twisted in frustration. Protect your future? You're only making things worse for yourself. If anyone finds out we were close to him, we'll be the prime suspects. Jessica exchanged a glance with David, both of them recognizing the gravity of the situation. They decided it was time to make their move. David took a deep breath and gestured for Jessica to follow him as they approached the two students. Sarah, Mark, David called out, his authoritative tone cutting through the evening air like a knife. Jessica felt her heart drop as both students turned to face them, surprise and wariness etched on their faces. What do you want? Over, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of a much darker reality. Jessica sat in the small, cluttered study room of the library, her heart racing as she sifted through the papers spread out before her. David, seated across from her, leaned in, his eyes narrowing as they examined the last piece of evidence they had gathered. Just moments ago, Jessica had stumbled upon a series of emails that revealed Sarah's connections to several professors, suggesting a network of bribery that could very well be the motive behind Professor Wright's murder. I can't believe this, Jessica muttered, her fingers tracing over the printed emails. Sarah was involved in something much bigger than we thought. She had to have known about Wright's research. If he was about to expose her, it makes sense. David nodded, his expression serious. We need to confront her with this evidence, but we must be careful. She's already shown she can be manipulative. We can't let her turn the tables on us." Jessica sighed, her thoughts racing. What if she tries to pin this on me again? After that last conversation, I can't shake the feeling that she's just waiting for an opportunity to strike. "Then we make sure we're prepared," David reassured her. "We'll go in with the evidence, and we'll make it clear we know what she's been doing. She won't be able to talk her way out of this." With a deep breath, Jessica pushed aside her fears. "Okay, let's do this." Just as they were about to leave, Jessica's phone buzzed violently on the table, startling both of them. She glanced at the screen, her stomach dropping as she saw the unknown number flashing. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Jessica Lane." A voice hissed on the other end, distorted and low. "You're digging too deep. If you know what's good for you, you'll drop this investigation. Or else." Jessica's heart raced, and she gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Just a friendly warning. There are things about Professor Wright that you don't understand. Things that can ruin you. Stay away from Sarah and Mark, or you'll regret it." The line went dead, and Jessica stared at her phone in shock. "That was terrifying," she managed, her voice shaking. "What did they say?" David asked, concern etched on his face. "They threatened me. They said if I didn't stop, I'd regret it. It has to be connected to Sarah. They know we're onto her." David leaned back, considering their next move. "We need to act fast. If they're willing to threaten you, that means they're scared. Let's go confront Sarah now. We can't let fear dictate our actions." Jessica nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They made their way to Sarah's dorm room, the tension palpable between them. As they approached, Jessica felt her hands clammy, her mind racing with possibilities of how Sarah would react. Would she play innocent? Would she lash out? David knocked sharply on the door. After a moment, it swung open, revealing Sarah, her expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "What do you want?" she snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "Can we come in?" David asked, his demeanor firm. Sarah hesitated, glancing between them before stepping aside with a huff.
"Fine.
But make it quick." Once inside, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. Jessica took a deep breath and stepped forward. "We know about the emails, Sarah. The bribery. The connections to the professors. You're in over your head." Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "What are you talking about? You have no idea what you're accusing me of." "Stop playing games," Jessica pressed, her voice steady. "You were involved in something that could have gotten Professor Wright killed. We have proof." "I'm not afraid of your threats," Sarah shot back, her bravado wavering slightly. "You think you can just waltz in here and intimidate me? You're the one who should be scared. You're the one who had a motive." Jessica felt the blood rush to her face, anger boiling within her. "This isn't about me. You had everything to gain by silencing him." David stepped in, his tone calm but authoritative. "Sarah, this is serious. We're giving you a chance to come clean. If you don't, you'll regret it when the police get involved." For a moment, Sarah's expression flickered, revealing the slightest hint of vulnerability. But just as quickly, it hardened again. "You don't know anything. You think you're so clever, but you're just a couple of scared students trying to play detective. You'll fail." Jessica took a step closer, her voice low and determined. "We won't fail. We'll find out the truth, and if you're involved, you'll be the one in trouble." As the confrontation escalated, the tension in the room became almost tangible. Jessica and David exchanged a knowing glance, aware that they were on the brink of uncovering something monumental. They had come too far to back down now, and with Sarah's defiance only fueling their resolve, they prepared for what was sure to be a pivotal moment in their investigation. The atmosphere in Daniel Wright's office was thick with tension as Jessica Lane, David O'Connor, Sarah, and Mark gathered for a confrontation that would reveal the tangled web of secrets surrounding the professor's death. The room, once a sanctuary of knowledge, now felt like a cage, with the shadows of doubt looming over each of them. Jessica stood at the center, her heart racing as she looked from one face to another. "We all know why we're here," she began, her voice steady yet laced with emotion. Wright's death wasn't just tragic, it was deliberate. And we're the ones who need to uncover the truth. Mark crossed his arms, a defensive posture that suggested he was prepared for an argument. You're just trying to deflect suspicion from yourself, Jessica. You were the last one to see him alive. What are you hiding? Enough, David interjected, his voice firm. This isn't about pointing fingers. We need to focus on what we know. He glanced at the papers spread across the desk, evidence of their investigation. Jessica found a connection between Sarah and a rare poison. We need to understand that before we start hurling accusations. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting toward the door as if considering an escape. This is ridiculous. I had nothing to do with Wright's death. I respected him. Respected him? Jessica challenged, stepping closer. Did you respect him when you were plotting with Mark to sabotage him? The email we found suggested you were at the center of something much bigger than just a rivalry. Mark's jaw clenched. You're making wild accusations, Jessica. Just because you're desperate to clear your name doesn't mean you can drag us down with you. As tensions flared, Jessica felt the weight of their accusations pressing down on her. I'm not the one who should be feeling desperate. You both know there's more at stake here. Wright was about to expose a scandal that could ruin lives. What were you two involved in that he was going to reveal? The room fell silent, the air crackling with unspoken truths. Suddenly, David's phone buzzed, pulling him away from the confrontation. He glanced at the screen, and then back at the group, his expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. I think we need to watch something. He pulled up a video on his phone, a grainy recording from the security cameras outside Wright's office. As the footage played, everyone leaned in, their eyes wide with anticipation. The scene unfolded. A figure cloaked in a hoodie slipped into the office, glancing around nervously before disappearing from view. Who is that? Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as they continued to watch. David fast-forwarded to the moment just before the figure exited. Let's see their face, he murmured, his brow furrowing in concentration. As the figure turned slightly, the camera caught a glimpse of the person's features. Jessica's breath hitched as the realization dawned upon her. No, it can't be. It's Professor Collins, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was in the office that night. Mark's eyes widened. What? No way. Collins wouldn't do that. Or maybe he would, David stated, his voice steady. Wright was about to expose something he was involved in. Collins had everything to lose. Sarah shook her head furiously, her earlier bravado crumbling. This is insane. You're all just trying to shift blame. Collins wouldn't kill Wright. Jessica felt emboldened, but he had the motive. He was in a position of power, and Wright was a threat to that. And that explains the emails about the secret meeting. Collins wanted to keep Wright quiet. As the reality of the situation sank in, a heavy silence enveloped the room. Each of them was grappling with the implications of what they had just seen. The tension was palpable, and the stakes had never felt higher. Then we need to go to the police, David declared, determination shining in his eyes. We can't let this go. If Collins is behind this, he needs to be stopped. Jessica nodded, her heart racing. But we need to be careful. If he's capable of murder, we can't underestimate him. Mark swallowed hard, the bravado draining from him. What if he comes after us next? Then we fight back, Jessica said, her voice resolute. For Wright, for the truth, and for ourselves. As they prepared to confront the imminent danger, Jessica felt a surge of strength. She wasn't just a suspect anymore. She was a part of something larger, a quest for justice that would define her future. The shadows that had once threatened to consume her were now merely obstacles to overcome. The real battle was just beginning.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.